So my goal of this video is to help people become more comfortable with using a jeweler saw and break less blades. And by the end of this, you should be able to cut detailed pieces much better than you were before it. So let's get started. So the most asked question I get is regarding sawing and how do I cut out super small pieces or the detailed things that I cut out. Well, I'm going to go over all that and show you what I do and how I don't break as many blades as I once did when I began doing this. When it comes to the saw frames themselves, I'm sure you've seen all of these on the market, the new concepts, the Haymaker, Green Lion, and then the German style ones. So for the most part, the frame is there to hold your saw blade tight, and that's pretty much it. So when it comes to the more expensive ones, they have little features that make it more comfortable or easier to switch things or just different things like that that basically add to the value of them and make your life a bit easier. With that said, I'm not going to be showing any of the higher end saw frames in this video and just stick with the traditional German style just to show you what you can do with a cheaper saw frame. I do have review videos on all of the higher end saw frames that I'll have links to in the description, but for now, let's just focus on the German style. When it comes to the German style frames, you'll notice that there's a couple different sizes. So you have an 8-inch, 5-inch, and 3-inch option. And for the most part, I suggest getting a 5-inch. Reason for this is it can cut through most metals. If you have large pieces of sheet metal, you can most likely get through it all, and it just overall is the middle ground of everything. Using a 3-inch, there's a lot of times where you're going to run into your work when you're working with bigger pieces of metal or even medium-sized pieces of metal, and you'll have to recut or cut from a different side, and it just becomes very annoying. So I don't even use the 3-inch one anymore. And the 8-inch one can cut through just about any piece of metal because of how much room it has to cut. The problem with this is it's very hard to control. So making very precise cuts is a lot more difficult on this. The smaller the throat, which is this area, the easier it is to handle because you don't have all this weight back here trying to pull you around. So technically the 3-inch one would be the easiest one to saw with, but it runs into your metal so much that it is more of a nuisance than just learning how to use a 5-inch one better. And there's not much difference to it. So when it comes to saw blades, there is an absolute ton of them on the market, but there is a big difference in quality from the lowest end ones to the higher end ones. These are on the higher end. These are the Nano line of blades from Pepe Tools. I'll let you know right now that I'm pretty much sponsored by Pepe Tools, but I still would suggest these if I was not, because they are the cheapest and they probably are one of the best blades on the market. So just keep that in mind. When I say the cheapest, I don't mean the cheapest on the market, I mean the cheapest for this quality of blade. If you look at some of the stuff on Amazon that has no listing or eBay or any of those other places, you can find blades for very cheap for packs that have an entire set of them, but they are very brittle and they're not the best blades. You're going to end up breaking them a lot more, and they also dole out really quick. These particular blades come in these little canisters, and it's very easy to store them and seal them up. They also have info on them, so you know what gauge they're supposed to be used with, which I didn't really see this on any other blade containers, and usually they're just bags anyways. And it's nice to actually have a hard case to hold them in. Also, you don't need this many saw blades, and what I mean is you don't need this variation of saw blades. If you're only really working on thinner sheet metals, you're only going to need like 1 or 2 sizes max. So yeah, you don't need this full range. I have it because of the whole sponsorship thing, and I deal with a ton of different sizes of metals, so all of them come in handy for me. So if you want to cut off like casting sprues and stuff like that, you're going to need a bigger saw blade than if you're going to be cutting through some thin sheet metal. So we're going to be using this one, which is not for the size metal we're going to be using, but I'll talk about that more in a second. So for this video, I'm going to be using some copper sheet metal. You can use brass, you can use silver, it doesn't really matter. You can even use aluminum if you really wanted to, but I don't suggest really cutting aluminum. It likes to gum up your blades. I have no idea what size this is in gauges, but this comes in really handy. This is a tool that I use more than I would like to admit because I forget what size metals I have. So all you need to do is basically put this into whatever one it fits. And if it's nice and snug like that, that's what gauge it is. So it's 20. If you go to 19, it'll be a little wiggly. And you can find pieces that are a little between sizes. But at least you can get a feel for what you need and what you have. So according to the packaging, this is for a 22 gauge. And this is a 20. So this is thicker than this is meant to be used on. You should technically be using either a 1/0 or a 2/0, according to the diagrams on these. But there's a reason why we're not. So I've found if you are cutting sharp edges, straight lines, or tiny areas, you want to use a smaller blade than you're supposed to, or something that's meant for cutting smaller material. You don't want to go too small because it's just going to take forever, but I've found that a couple sizes down usually works. So I'm going to be going through a lot of this and showing you the different techniques I use to get really nice cuts. And this template will actually be in the description below, so go down there and download it. It's free of charge. All I ask is for a like on this video. When it comes to stuff like this, you can really find anything online and cut it out to your heart's content, or you can design your own stuff like I did. You will have to learn a program like Illustrator or Inkscape. But once you do that, you can pretty much design whatever you want. So speaking of those two programs, it's a perfect time to talk about the sponsor of this video, which is Skillshare. So I thought Skillshare would be a perfect sponsor for my channel, seeing that you come here to learn stuff, and Skillshare is a community for learning. And just like my videos, you can learn at your own pace. And one thing I like about it is every class is project-oriented, so you're working towards a goal and not just random skills. So you'll actually have something by the end of it. So if you're looking to learn Adobe Illustrator, I suggest taking the Essentials training from Daniel Scott. And if you want to learn Inkscape, which is a free program, I suggest checking out Gaia Marvert. So for the first 1,000 people to click on the link in my description, you will get a free trial of Skillshare Premium. This gives you full access to the entire catalog that Skillshare has to offer. And after your trial, Skillshare is as low as $10 a month with an annual subscription. So thank you Skillshare for sponsoring this video and supporting my channel. So how do I get this onto my metal? Well, this is actually printed on label paper. So it's basically sticky paper and I just cut it out and stick it on. If you don't have a label maker, you can use super glue. And I actually suggest using super glue for this if you're not using label paper, just because it keeps everything bonded to your metal. And when you want to get it off, you can just heat it up with a torch and burn it off. You can use a glue stick as well, but I have had problems with it releasing, and then it ruins your entire cut because it's really hard to line it back up again. So one of the first practice pieces is the straight line piece. I'm going to go through and show you how to do straight lines, then do a sharp turn and go through the whole thing. And with the label paper, you just literally cut it out, but you want to leave somewhat of a gap or extra on there. On all of these, I've made it so you can see where you need to cut, but on the practice pieces, I didn't really do it that much. Another thing with the label paper is you need to be able to get it off. I take it off first and then cut off any excess. It makes it just easier to peel, and try not to touch the back of it too much. So there we go. So when it comes to the bench pen, I'm using the one that is a quick release from GRS, and you have a bunch of options in these. If you don't have this little setup, if you have a workbench that has a overhang to it, you can clamp on a bunch of different styles of bench pens. And if you don't have an overhang, what I used for many years was a piece of wood. This is about 11 millimeters thick, and I just kind of bolted it down hanging off the edge, so I had an edge to clamp things to. So when it comes to the bench pens themselves, there's a ton of options, just like pretty much everything else, and you have to pick and choose what you want. A lot of them will come like this, where just a wedge of wood basically that you cut to however you like it. There's also the option of working on this surface or working on the flat surface. So I personally like working on it on the flat surface, but it's going to be up to you what you prefer. Once you do get yours, you're going to be able to design however you want your cutout area to be. So this is basically a traditional setup. It's just a hole with a triangle going into it. Setting them up is going to be solely up to how you want to be sawing. So I used to have a large slot in mine, and then I added holes later on that is basically how I saw everything now. There's also some that already come with everything cut out, and it's just good to go out of the box. So a lot of these bench pins come with a anvil setup that you can basically put this in, this mounts to everything, and you're good to go. Problem with a lot of them is the work area. It's very limited on the ones that basically run into this. So if you're working with a bigger piece of metal, you really can't, because it'll just hit on that. There are a lot of them on the market that it's just a piece of wood. I don't happen to have any, but it's basically a little clamp that clamps onto your desk and it's just flat all the way across. Or you can find some that have an anvil that is flush with your block. And for those of you wondering why is there black on the top of this one and none of the others have it, this is just glue to fill in all the holes because I've used this bench pin so much that it was falling apart and I just filled it in with glue. So as you've seen with my other bench pins, I had a lot of different configurations of how I had them, but this is it now. This is how mine is. I have one 6mm hole with a cutout so my blade can fit through there, and that's it. Also, I work with it upside down like this instead of having the slanted side up. So for loading your saw frame, there's probably a bunch of different ways of doing this. For the most part with the German ones, I find out the length that I need to actually hold the blade in it, and then I lock this in place and never move it. So you just want to take your saw blade, which is almost unseeable on the camera, and you want to make sure the teeth are all facing down. I'll have a zoomed in picture here showing that. So just to show that these blades are not super brittle like the other ones that I was talking about, you can pretty much do that with it and it's good. And kind of just goes back to normal. So I like to open up the bottom one first and seat my blade in there. And with that in there, I can lock it up against my bench pin or just push up against the bench and press on it and then lock this in place. And there we go, it's set. And it should be nice and tight where you can take your nail on it and strum it. One super important thing when cutting though with these blades or any blade is you need some sort of cut lube to put on your blade to make sure that it's going to not overheat itself and break and then get snagged or any of that other stuff. And it just makes it so much easier to go through all of your cutting and everything like that. All right, so here's our first practice piece. I'm going to take my saw and get it into my bench pin like this, and I need to start my cut. To do this, instead of pulling down on it, I'm going to push up, and just that little bit of pushing up will make a small divot that you can see right there. And from that, you can actually start sawing. And when sawing, you don't need to put much pressure. You don't need to be pushing forwards or anything too hard. It'll just kind of work its way. So as you can see, I've already cut a decent way into the metal. So when holding your saw frame and sawing, you actually need to make sure that it's going up and down as much as you possibly can. If any turns or anything like that will risk you breaking the blade, and you'll leave weird angles in your cut. All right, so I'm at the start of my line, and I want to just go along it without moving the saw frame whatsoever to make a straight line. And right when I get to the end of the line, I can stop. You'll also notice that it makes sawdust everywhere. You can blow on this every so often and it'll go away so you can see your lines better. So once I get to an end like this and I need to turn, the best way to do this is to move your blade up and down and turn your metal. And there you go. Then you can go straight again. and then continue this process. So if you're having trouble with this, where you can't really move this and keep the blade straight, you can go up and down and move your saw and then realign everything. So you might notice that I keep moving this back to reposition the piece. It's because I only have that small 6mm hole that I can work in. As soon as I hit the edge of it, I'll start cutting the wood. So that's why I have to keep moving it. The reason why I like that little hole only is the piece is supported almost all the way around. So there's almost no chance of it bending or getting snagged from the sawing. So there we go. We have our little practice part cut out, basically a straight line and curves. So I'm going to cut the rest of this out just so we have this piece out of the metal. And it uses the same process on the outside. So here's our piece completely cut out. And you'll see that there's a little gap that I can move this around. And that's just because our saw blade actually has a thickness to it. So it's removing that material. So you're going to have that no matter what you do. So you're going to have to keep that in mind. But you can get things really close together, and you can basically fill these with solder a lot of the time if you're trying to join two pieces together, say if there are two different metals. So you might also notice that these are a little curvy. You can clean that up using a file. So basically with a tiny bit of cleanup, you can square off all your corners and make them as sharp as you'd like. So now I'm just going to show you some basic pierce cutting. Basically, you just drill a hole in this and then you thread your blade through, set your blade, and you're good to go. And you can cut all the inside out of something. So you might notice some dots here. These are for your center punch, so you can make it easier for you to drill a hole through. You don't have to use any of these. You can drill wherever you'd like, but these are just the points where I would start it at. So I'm just going to be doing one of them, and I'm going to be using a 0.8mm drill bit. When drilling stuff out, make sure you use some cut lube as well. So to start the piercing cut, all you need to do is release the top part of your frame, feed this through the little hole that we just put into it, and then I feed it all the way down to the bottom so it's not dragging on this piece, and then push this back in place and tighten it up. And there we go. So for this piece, I'm going to go out to an edge and then turn in from the edge. And then stop at the point and come back to where we started and go to the other side and do the same. And when you're just about to the end of it, slow down, and there we go. So let me show you what I just did. So this will give you sharp corners. This works on anything that has a sharp edge that you need to come to. As long as you basically trace one side and then the other to it, you'll end up with a sharp corner. One other super important thing for cutting out pieces like this is to cut out all of your piercing cuts first and then cut out the outside of your piece. It just makes it easier for you to handle, and it basically makes it so it's harder to bend as you're working. So if you want to move backwards through a cut, you can basically just pull back, but if it gets stuck, you can just use the sawing motion and move it backwards. So there's our triangle cut out. You can see right here where I had to cut into everything, it's not perfectly straight, which we can easily fix that with a file. So there we go, much better, just using a little bit of filing. So now we can cut out the outside of it. So I'm going to show you something and mess up on purpose to show you how to fix your line if it's not going straight. So say you're going and you start to wander off to one side. So as you can see, it's kind of going off outside of your piece, which this is totally fine. If you cut outside, this is the way to make a mistake and be able to fix it. If you cut into your piece, that's where it's a problem. So if anything, try to pull away more and then you can fix this later. So we're gonna get real zoomed in here so you can see what's going on. So see how I'm out that far? I'm gonna come back to wherever it started and just kind of start again, kind of pushing on the saw towards the pattern until it catches, and then I can just keep going. And that's how you can fix if you start wandering like that. And like I said, make sure you wander outside of your piece if you can help it. So here's our very sharp triangle with all of the piercing cut done, and looks pretty good. The outsides still need to be cleaned up with a file to make everything as flat as possible, but that can be done later. So straight lines are cool and all, but let's do something more curvy. So just like before, we need to get into this piece, and I'll just start a divot and start going in. So this is where I kind of do things wrong. You're supposed to only move your metal piece that you're working on and not your saw blade or saw frame. I do a little bit of both. All right, so there we go. This is a really good way to practice keeping a line along with moving everything around in circles and dealing with multiple pieces trying to bend on you all at once. Because the more you're cutting this, the more it's turning into this floppy thing here, and you can feel it as you're working. You might have noticed I had my fingers on it on both sides of wherever I was sawing, and continuously moved it like so. So just keep that in mind and you should be able to do this with no problems. So to mix things up a little bit, we're going to get a little bit smaller and have multiple piercing cuts and have curves. So just like before, we just need to feed our blade into our piece and reset it. Make sure to lubricate your blade, and here we go. So with this particular one, I'm going to start in an arc to line up with one of the edges to make sure that there's no real transition. So there we go. That's one little paw part done. You can't really see it, but if I flip it over, you can see that it's a pretty good transition there. Maybe a little sanding and it would be perfect. So we just need to do that to all the rest of them. Just cut in, try to go along the lines as you're cutting in, so the transition is far enough away that when you come back around, it just reconnects to itself and you really can't see where the saw started. So there's all of our piercing cuts, and all of them look almost perfect. Just very little cleanup. You're always going to have cleanup when sawing, but it's minimizing that is the key. So let's cut it completely out. And this is a much thinner piece, so we're going to cut in one go all the way around. And at the same time, try to support this so if there's any catches or anything, it doesn't bend the entire piece. So there we go. And with that one single cut, it should just come out. And we have our little paw print. And you can see, very delicate, but it is all done and it came out pretty much perfect. Still needs that little bit of cleanup, but yeah, this is a very good way of practicing your piercing cuts, moving, and working with smaller pieces like this. So with all of those basic skills that I just showed, you should be able to cut out just about anything. So I'm going to show doing that with this. So if you do want to try cutting this piece out, just keep in mind that it will take you quite a bit of time. It took me about an hour to get this completely cut out. So just be patient and take your time with this. Rushing will just make things worse, and you should be able to use all the skills I've taught in this video to successfully do this. So there we go. You should be able to use all the things I showed you to cut this piece out. You might not be able to do it without breaking a blade or anything like that, but you should be able to at least do better than when you started out. So that's pretty much all the test pieces that I wanted to cut out and show on this. There are some extras included, but for the most part, they pretty much cover the same things. So I know people don't just have copper laying around that they can use to practice cutting stuff out, and it can get kind of expensive for people just starting out. So you can literally cut out coins, and it's not illegal to cut them out. So don't worry about that. So just pick a design that's on there and cut it out. And that is a good way to practice your pierce cutting, or you can cut directly into it and cut the pieces out of it. And you're literally spending pennies to get practice in. So that's pretty much it for this. If you want to see some other sawing videos I've made in the past, I'll make sure to have links in the description or in the side over here. And leave a like on this video if it was helpful, leave a comment if you have any questions, and subscribe. I try to make new videos every week. Well, that's about it, so I'll see you guys next time. Bye.